Jesi milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure. This podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myths, mysteries and majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, Dungeons and Dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, the powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep on the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
I'm always thankful when I can interview or chat with new friends and guests on the podcast who are gifted by God when it comes to imagination, storytelling, but also theology. And the best thing, at least for someone like me, is when someone is able to put all of these things together in simple terms and explain it to the wide audience so that their appreciation and understanding of the Bible is getting wider and they see God with new imagination, with new awe, and they see God for truly majestic being who he is. So welcome to episode 157. We are welcoming for the first time Caleb Lewis, author of this phenomenal book that he titled Through the Waters, a Biblical Theology of the Book of Genesis. I promise this is one of those episodes where you want to take notes. We'll be combining biblical theology with the ancient Near East and some of the ancient Middle Eastern mythologies so that you can learn more when it comes to this topic. But before we start diving into Caleb's book, Caleb, thank you so much for finding time for the audience and myself. And maybe we can start by you introducing yourself, something about you spiritually, theologically, and then we'll ask you what led you to writing a phenomenal book like this.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Nicola. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. I guess just a little background for myself. I was brought into the faith. Had some really great guys, one guy in particular really discipling me as I was kind of on the tail end of high school and bringing me in through a lot of very weighty theological topics. They were answering questions that I just had never heard answers to before. And so that's what really made the Bible start to click with me, because I started to understand how the Bible relates to your worldview. I mean, that's important. If it doesn't relate to your worldview, how in the world are you going to, again, make it your world and see Jesus as the king of your world? So that was huge for me. But the more that I got into trying to learn more about the Bible, understand who Jesus is, I was drawn more to the fact that Jesus references the first portion of the Bible a lot more than anything else. That's where he sees his life and ministry coming from, is the story of the Old Testament. And so that has since just plunged me into the Old Testament, from there back to the Torah, from there back to Genesis, just trying to understand more of who Jesus is and the story that he sees himself a part of. So that's, again, why I am doing what I do. I want to help people see that as well.
Thank you so much. That's such a wonderful introduction. And I want to share your book when it comes to the Amazon. I have included Caleb's Amazon book link to this video description. Again, it's an amazing book. You got maximum reviews. You'll enjoy it. This is not like a novel, something that you will read in a few days, even though the book is 250 pages. So it's not that thick, but it's one of those books that, because it will help you with biblical understanding and studies, you don't want to read that much. You will need to stop, think about it, maybe check certain biblical passages you can enjoy and grasp the fullness of it. Again, I have included the link, but I just wanted to show to people this beautiful cover page and the title of your book. Caleb, when it comes to your book, you've been getting amazing reviews. You've been guests on different podcasts. Have people come to you and say, "Hey, Caleb, this book has blessed me so much. It opened my eyes to see the Bible with different lenses, or deeper, or to get that ancient context, because we are so much distance geographically, historically, and also time-wise when it comes to the original recipients of these books of the Bible." And books like yours help us a lot to understand and make it more easier for us to apply certain things from the Old Testament. What is the overall expression from people who read it and they came and tell you, "Wow, like this changed my life"?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it seems like it's been very helpful for those who have read it and that I've spoken to, because especially the literary structures that I highlight through the book, and as you said, the cultural context behind it, you just don't really get access to that from. I mean, it's either buried deep in scholarship, or it's you just don't really get access to it. So I was able to bring a lot of that to light, along with some new findings, I guess, that I had found with the literary structures going on, and it just ties the narrative together in such a way that it really drives home the point of Genesis. I won't go too far for now, but I'll say that's kind of the response, because Genesis is such a weird book. And it's easy to either just say, "This is confusing, I'm leaving this alone," or to say, "It's just a big collection of moral stories," or something like that, or it's just a history book or something. So to really tie it together as a unified narrative that has a consistent theological, typological message, that's new. And it's very meaningful as really the foundation book of our Bibles.
Yeah, thank you for that. When it comes to the introduction, you said is the goal of the present work is to explore the presence and significance of two motives that are integrated into the literary organization of the book of Genesis. As these motifs are traced throughout the book, attention will be given to the development of the narrative, especially in the light of these motives. These two motives are the Exodus motive and what I will call the two goats motive. So maybe we can start by you explaining to the audience who didn't buy your book yet. So like, "Oh, what is this about?" Maybe we can explain it for them.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Exodus motif and the two goats motif. Most people listening to this should hopefully know what the Exodus is, at least, so that doesn't sound too off. So the Exodus motif has a few main steps, and there's really been a lot of scholarship lately on the Exodus motif as it stretches throughout the Bible. Some have already noticed it with Abraham coming out of Egypt. That sounds very much like the Exodus of Israel out of Egypt in Genesis 12. So that should sound familiar. However, I think throughout Genesis, there are some other steps in the motif that are highlighted that you don't get as fleshed out later in Scripture. Because people such as Brian Estelle, or is a collection of works by Michael Fox that have gone through and highlighted through the prophets how the Exodus is the primary paradigm of God's salvation of his people. And that carries on through in the Gospels, the epistles, into Revelation. Really just throughout the Bible, the Exodus is the main way that God's salvation of his people is depicted. And so in Genesis, what we see a lot is roughly 8 steps that are highlighted to signal, hey, this is the Exodus motif. And sometimes you'll have all these present, sometimes you won't have all of them. It just depends on what the author is trying to do at that point. So what we see usually is there is some chosen person who is in a place of violence or oppression. Sometimes they're in exile. 2, Yahweh sees, hears, or comes to know of that situation. The enemies then are defeated or struck. And then the elect one, the chosen one, is brought out, often with this mixed multitude or increased possessions. That one's really key there. That's kind of the 4th step, but it shows up a lot throughout Genesis and is a big signal throughout the prophets as well. Whenever that chosen one comes out with a mixed multitude of people and increased possessions. Then there is a new creation, which that part is also really key. And as we talk about that more, it'll sound more familiar. So a new creation, then the chosen one is put in Yahweh's dwelling or his temple or his garden land. The chosen one is then commissioned as a priest. He is blessed. Sometimes he's to serve in God's dwelling. And then there is often, sadly, the story continues with an act of disloyalty to Yahweh and an exile. So those are kind of the 8 steps we see with the Exodus motif. And the 2 goats motif, that's the one that sounds probably, you'll have no idea what that means. I've kind of coined the term 2 goats because I didn't really know what else to call it. And the reason I called it the 2 goats motif is because this motif comes to a head in the Day of Atonement, the 2 goats in Leviticus 16 that are used to send the sin away from the camp and to purge sin from the tabernacle. So I've said the word motif a lot. Before I go into the 2 goats motif, let me just say a motif is a pattern. That's all it means. So this literary motif is just a literary pattern that shows up again and again. So the 2 goats motif, what we also often see is, I'll go through how it shows up in Genesis and then talk a little bit about how it goes into Leviticus, just for the sake of completeness, because that's really where you start to understand this motif. So there are often 2 brothers throughout Genesis. You think of Cain and Abel, or Jacob and Esau, Isaac, Ishmael, those characters. And there's a younger brother who is often chosen to be the firstborn or the leader of the family. And he gets to carry forward that seed of the woman promise that we see back in Genesis 3. Then that older brother, seeing this, he acts with some sort of hostility, some jealousy towards this now elect brother. The older brother is then given some protection, even though they've done something horrible to this younger brother. God still shows some love for them. Then the older brother is exiled into the wilderness. The older brother is multiplied into a nation, and then that nation every time becomes hostile to God's people. Then the elect brother is often brought closer into Yahweh's presence, into his land, into his garden, something like that. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes this elect brother is associated with an offering. And that part gets really interesting as we go forward. So that's kind of a summary of the Exodus motif and the 2 goats motif as we find them in Genesis.
Yeah, I was just about to add on that. I like how when you started writing the book, you're like, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you said something that there are different methods in understanding and interpreting the Bible, of course. And what you're proposing, it's not something that just only you see. And you gave examples when it comes to Exodus. You gave and Genesis. You compare this and you say, do you see the wording? Do you see the grammar? And you also cite scholars. This is not something you invented. And you and sometimes that motif or the parallel, the pattern doesn't have to be completely copy paste, 100%. But that's the message that will be the trace of the story or the narrative that we will see throughout the Pentateuch. And you're like, well, this is more connected than you thought. And I didn't think about this so much before. I have to be honest. So your book helped me to think even deeper and better when it comes. So I think this is a nice intro to the first chapter that we'll be analyzing today. I like how you start with these words. You said the creation narrative begins with darkness and the spirit, ruach, of God over the waters. This is found in Genesis 1:2. Ruach can be also translated as spirit, breath, or wind. The waters are then separated in Genesis 1:7, and dry land is then caused to appear 2 verses later. All of this is to make way for Yahweh's creation of humanity on the 6th day. At the exodus of Israel out of Egypt, Yahweh again creates a new people to be his own, beginning with similar steps as the people of Israel stand at the edge of the Sea of Reeds, waiting for deliverance, with the angel of God standing between them and the Egyptian army. Exodus 14:21 reads, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by the strong east wind, Ruach, all night and made the sea dry land and the waters were divided. I'm like, wow, such a beautiful comparison between two different books of God, two different books of Moses, and how there are these so many similar patterns, so many similar images, so many similar concepts that authors, pastors, scholars, people like you help us to understand and see better. So maybe we can start by this first parallel when it comes to ruach, when it comes to wind, that can also be translated as the Spirit of God, and waters.
Yeah. So before I jump into that real quick, I just want to bounce off what you said because this is how this was shown to me. Was, like I said, there have been some who have already detailed how the Exodus pattern shows up in some steps in creation and shows up in, like I said, Genesis 12. And it always made me think, if the Exodus pattern is so central, then why does it only show up in Genesis 12 and at creation? And then I started recognizing that, and they came out with a mixed multitude and great possessions over and over. Like, wait a minute, is there more to this? Is there more elements of the pattern? So I started looking through, and I mean, after going through that, I saw, Seth Postel's work about how just these beginning chapters mirror the rest of Israel's history, like you're saying. And so it really brings out, this is just, again, setting the stage for the rest of the Bible. And it's, to me, that's amazing. But anyway, yeah, we'll go ahead with, like you said, talking about the parallel between the parting of the waters in Genesis and Exodus with the Spirit. So like you said, in Genesis 1 verse 2, we have the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. And again, yeah, ruach, it can be translated as spirit, breath, or wind. It's just kind of, your ruach is that, like, it's what you breathe out. That's your wind. It's also kind of your life energy. So anyway, that's you have ruach there. And then the waters are divided, they're parted, and the dry land comes up, the Hebrew word yavashah. And so fast forward to Exodus, and this is just, again, one of the several steps between the shared elements of creation and Exodus. But in Exodus 14, again, you have the waters of the Reed Sea being pushed back by an east wind. And so that wind there is the word ruach. So you have waters, again, being separated with ruach present. And with it being from the east, I have a suspicion that also is pointing us back to the fact that this is from God, since exile is away from God to the east throughout, really just the biblical narrative. So again, yeah, ruach and waters. And then what appears after the Reed Sea is pushed back? Yavashah, dry land, once again. And the people come through the waters. And again, there's this whole new creation motif. You get Adam coming out of the dry land, or coming out of the initial creation, and then God's new creation as he draws them out and renames them, gives them a new function, a new purpose. We can talk more about that if you want to, but that's kind of the way that ancient peoples saw creation was not just about the creation of material, but about the taking of something, separating it out, and designating it for a new purpose. So just like a jar of clay. But anyway, yeah, we can go wherever you want to with that.
Yeah, I just a question popped in my mind. I didn't plan to ask this, but since we're talking about the very beginning, Genesis 1, there's scholars who are saying, hey, even though of course God created everything ex nihilo, everything, everything out of nothing, yet if you go to the first few verses in Genesis 1, I just wanted to ask you, would you share the same opinion or not? That it doesn't speak necessarily about the very beginning, because the earth was already formed. It speaks, and again, this is, I think, what is helpful in our modern mind versus the ancient mind, because yeah, for them, of course, God made everything, but they're not going maybe in the very, very first millisecond of existence. They're talking about, well, the planet was already there. Of course, God made it, but we're talking about because it was so it was desolate. It was not inhabitable for people. So God had to remove waters. God had to make the soil, had to make it fertile, had to prepare life for humankind to come, for his imagers, us, as the crown of his creation, to come and dwell, and that he would come dwell with us in the Garden of Eden, that would represent the first temple, so to speak, because there are other scholars like Michael Morales, John Walton, who, when they compare how the garden and later the tabernacle and the temple were structured, as well as how they were like decorated, they say, well, garden seems to be the first temple. But even before the temple, do you see that the very beginning is not about, hey, this was about science? Actually, it was about God creating. Well, it was already planted. The planet was already there, but it was dead, so to speak. So the Spirit of God, who brings life, had to come, move the waters, move the chaos, move the Leviathan, so that people would be able to live, and not just live, but to thrive. So maybe if you want to say something on this, because this is where my nerdy radar goes so much up, and I always get excited about these things.
Yeah, no, this is a topic I've actually been, I told you earlier that I've been living in kind of the ancient Near Eastern texts for quite a while at this point, as far as just like what I'm currently focused on. This is exactly what I'm focused on. So I could give you the 30-second version or the 20-minute version, but I'll keep it kind of short, but give some detail here. But the first thing that you need to recognize is there are a lot of parallels, like you mentioned, John Walton has pointed out, between the ancient Near Eastern creation accounts and Genesis. And the way that, but before I answer the creation ex nihilo question, there's two aspects of this. First of all, when you look at Genesis through the lens of the ancient Near Eastern worldview, it makes a lot of sense. And they have this view of essentially the earth being a flat earth inside of this giant water bubble, inside of the cosmic abyss, the Tehom, this big chaotic ocean. You mentioned planets, so we live on a round planet. We don't live inside that little bubble, and I'm okay with taking that, not scientifically, but this is the meaning behind this, is taking their culture and saying God is king, Yahweh is on top. That's the point there. And every ancient Near Eastern society, again, they weren't looking so much at the material. They were looking at not how did the material come to be, but how did order in society come out of chaos? That's the question they were asking. And so, again, that wasn't really their concern. And so I think that if you go to Genesis 1 and ask the question of, is this ex nihilo against the ancient Near Eastern backdrop, it's really not. You can't really, I think you can't get there with Genesis 1 because you have, and that's a contested thing. I'll say that right there. So let me just say that whether each side of the debate here, there are Jesus trusting people on both sides of the debate, and this is a secondary issue we can disagree on and serve together. So I just want to put that up front because that comes up a lot. But what you see there is, again, the pre-existent chaos. The pre-existent chaos might be the wrong word, but sort of this wasteland and ruin, and God is shaping it into something that is a place for Him and His imagers to dwell. That is what you get primarily out of Genesis 1. And even if you do take the very first verse as the first act of creation, you're actually still kind of left with a mystery, because it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. From what? It doesn't tell you. So it doesn't say from nothing. It doesn't say from pre-existent material. It doesn't say from Himself, like material or creation ex deo. It doesn't tell you. So you're kind of left to use the already ancient Near Eastern assumption of creation from pre-existent waters, darkness, and earth. So that's kind of my 3-minute answer, I suppose. What do you think?
Thanks for that. I always love going to these things, not just because of biblical theology, but also because it inevitably leads you to imagination, mythologies, and some even older extra biblical sources that we have. So it's always fun when we compare them. But basically, like you said, this is not to be taken in a scientific way, rather that Yahweh, opposing other gods in different religions, is sovereign, and He's on top of this. And unlike Marduk, or unlike Baal, or unlike any other deity in these other ancient Near East mythologies, it is Yahweh who not only wrestles, so to speak, with chaos, but He subdues the chaos. And it's not even an enemy worthy of God. Just like Satan in Revelation is not worthy opponent of Jesus. You don't see, they're fighting all day, all night, or it's like tight. You don't see anything like that. So God is subduing chaos and like, okay, it's not a problem for me. I'll do it for my creation. And then later we see flora and fauna and human life flourishing. So I think, just like you said, and some other scholars, this actually is what makes sense. From the very get go, it's Yahweh who is in charge of everything. He's the one who is sovereign. He's the king, not just of your little garden, just like of your planet, but he's the king of the whole universe. So for me, that's a beautiful, majestic picture of God from the very get go. If we understand that ancient Near East context behind the text. So I think it's beautiful the way that we can like be even more amazed and fall in love with God, if I can say it that way.
Well, and then if the whole point is more so the building of a people and a society and a place for them to dwell together, I think that's so much more beautiful of a passage and a beautiful meaning than just, atoms came into existence, as amazing as that would be. But you look at Revelation, go from the beginning to the end. In the very end of Revelation, it says, darkness is no more, God is your light, and the waters, the sea is no more, and there's a city coming down. So finally, that first act of creation is accomplished at the end. So again, we could talk about this for a while, but just the large overarching biblical narrative things going on there that are just wonderful about what God is doing with us.
Yeah, I remember you writing about this, and I'm like, yeah, exactly. When you see Revelation, it's basically the end of Revelation. It's going back to Genesis. It's like God has been since the beginning doing the same thing. I want my people to come to me. I want to dwell with them. I don't want to be separate from them. I want to destroy everything that bothers them: sickness, death, sin, mortality, darkness, chaos, waters. That doesn't mean there won't be waters or water in the new heaven and
Right.
new earth. That's not what it says. But if we understand the imagery behind these words, we're like, oh, God will destroy what the ocean waters, what the sea waters would represent as stormy seas with this supposed Leviathan. If when you see the images, and you provided by the end of your first chapter, that Leviathan was portrayed to be almost as the half of the size of the planet. So you can already tell some things are there not to be taken super literally in a most wooden, context or scientifically, but they're there to tell us that Yahweh is above the Leviathan. God is above the serpent, and He'll destroy everything to bring their people back to His presence. So in the new heaven and the new earth, well, let's say new earth, we're going back to that garden imagery where we'll be dwelling with God. And I believe in the same fashion God was walking with Adam and Eve. Now, I don't know how God will walk, and if God will walk personally with billions of people that will get saved over time in the eschaton, in that final day. I don't know how that will look like, or even that wedding day. Like, will there be billion seats literally? I don't know how that will look like. Sometimes I wonder, I'm like, God, that I don't understand, but that's okay. But basically, God wants us to walk with us just in the same way He was walking with Adam. And He doesn't love Adam more than He loves us. And that's that fatherly picture of like closeness and intimacy that God wants to bring. But before that happens, all the enemies have to disappear and die before that. So God has been doing this rescue mission from the very get-go, from Genesis again to Revelations, just going back 180. Go back, reset and start over again. But like you said, we can talk about this for a long time. I love these things. They make me so excited. Okay, when it comes to, after us speaking about Rua and about us speaking about a creation ex nihilo, you touch on the darkness over the face of the waters. You said that in the biblical worldview, the darkness and waters present in Genesis 1:2 have significance beyond their physical properties. Throughout the Bible, darkness is used as a breach and foreboding image. It is found as death or Sheol, a place for the wicked deeds, the domain of satanic powers, and as means of judgment. So maybe we can do this parallel of darkness and light.
Yeah. So really, just like you said there, and you can see a lot of this. This is pretty standard in scholarship. If you just look up, the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery, that's a pretty popular resource where you can take a look at darkness and light. And yeah, it's associated with negative things, with evil or death, whereas light is the opposite of that. Light is sort of God's presence, his giving light, like the menorah in the tabernacle. Whereas, especially in the Genesis account, the darkness is directly associated with uncreation, that wasteland, and kind of tohu vavohu, chaotic state. And since the waters are also associated with the underworld and death, you kind of get that same. It's not a direct associate, but the same feel with darkness. So yeah, again, darkness is just pretty much always very bad, very negative, and light is at least positive, and at best it represents God's presence.
Yeah, it's also interesting how I'm currently in the same part of the chapter, how you give example of Exodus 10 verses 21 to 28, how God can use something like darkness to strike the Egyptians who were so stubborn and didn't want to obey. Well, basically they didn't want to obey Yahweh through Moses as his spokesperson to let the people go. So God used something that for people would be an enemy, like darkness, but God would use darkness to send on the Egyptians. And I see the same parallel, and maybe we can continue with that because the next chapter is about waters. Waters like darkness, or why not? I can even say this about fire or sex or money. All these things can be good and bad. Depends on how we use it. In the same fashion, how God uses. So the water of baptism, the water of rescue for Noah's Ark, the water that Jesus told us to when it comes to the baptism, when it comes to obeying His sacraments. So water is good. Water brings life. You will die after several days if you don't drink any liquid. But on the other side, there are these stormy waves. There are these stormy, deep waters that people would get scared because if you're not swimming, even if you're swimming, but let's say you had a shipwreck, just like Paul. But if you're in the middle of the ocean or sea and there's no help, there's no. I mean, the chances of your survival are not that big. And then you're wondering what is there in the deep. Is there a monster coming after you? And I'm not just talking about whales and sharks. I'm talking about like what our primordial fear will bring into us to even imagine what is there. And then even if there's something right there, like let's talk about prehistoric animals. I just saw recently, was a megalodon shark that they found the jaws, and that jaws were like, just the jaws were way bigger than the regular shark size. So that megalodon could probably eat 10 sharks like in a minute easily. So imagine something like that, like in the horror movies. But let's say that's hypothetically it's true for us today. Let's say there are these monsters, and you're in those waters. You feel like, oh, I'm about to have a heart attack because I'm scared. And where is my rescue coming from? It's coming from the Lord, like we see in Psalms, right, and from the prophets. So I just wanted to continue from darkness, how it's usually seen bad, but God can still use it to punish the enemy. And we can now switch to waters. They can both be good and they can both be bad, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, these elements from before creation, the pre-creation state was not a good place. It's not a good thing, but the elements that are there, they're putty in Yahweh's hands. They're not hostile. He can do what he wants with them and turn them into something good. And like you said, we have to have water. Sometimes there's water of cleansing and all throughout biblical ritual and Leviticus, things like that. But what you see, like you said, if you're living back before we had, I don't know, planes, satellites, all this technology, and you're looking out over the ocean, and it does not end ever. It just keeps going. And you're also told that there is Leviathan, this big sea dragon that lives out there. It's a horrifying place. Also in this worldview that you're showing right here, if you were to drop off the edge of the land and just keep falling through, you're gonna end up in the realm of the dead, down in Sheol. So the ocean is just a gateway to death in every respect, for probably the thinker who has this worldview in their head. So yeah, even the waters of baptism. So I talk about this actually later on in towards the end of the book, but the waters of baptism actually represent as the waters part and Adam comes out, as the waters part and Noah comes through, as the waters part and Israel comes through at the Exodus, that's us taking on that same Exodus pattern that Jesus took on to go through death and come back out the other side as a new creation. Just, again, following Israel, following Jesus.
I have a question. In your studying the Bible and reading so many scholars over time, do you have the definitive answer of if Leviathan was real or not, or if it was just supposed to portray and mimic, other mythologies? So, for the sake of polemics, well, Yahweh is a stronger. In our worldview, we're doing apologetics, we're doing polemics, so we can draw from ancient sources, and we can put that the sea serpent or the ancient this dragon, yeah, it is scary, but Yahweh is bigger than him. He will subdue him or subdue it. So in that context, perfectly makes sense because it's a theological, spiritual imagery and message. Yes, but some scholars go and say, well, with Behemoth and Leviathan, they're like, yeah, we're trying to discern who these animals or beasts were, and they truly existed. So I'm split because I can see both, that it was just a spiritual imagery of the arch enemy or arch enemy of God, Satan. But I'll also see well, maybe it was one of those long dinosaurs that were just living in the waters and swimming, because I heard biblical scholars and professors understanding those passages like that. But I think they would see this merely, and I mean no offense, but they would see this merely logically without employing the ancient Near East context. They'll just see it oh, well, based on the description, we think it's this type of animal, and they'll show us some ancient dinosaur. So, but in your understanding and reading so far on Leviathan or even Behemoth, would you think these were real animals, or they were just to portray something spiritual and theological?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I don't know if I'll give you the definitive answer, but I'll give you my 2 cents at least. And I get what you're asking as well, because I live just a couple hours from a very large boat. And I used to be on that train as well. But as I got more into biblical studies, I'm not quite in the same place anymore. So what I see, Leviathan, you brought up Behemoth as well. Those, for example, are not a hippo and a crocodile or something like that. I really recommend, if somebody wants to dig deeper into this, go to Robert Fayol's book, Now My Eyes Have Seen You. It's a good study in Job about those animals and some other things, but all of those are housed or sourced in ancient Near Eastern mythology. So, for instance, with Leviathan, you have the Tiamat, which was the Mesopotamian god of the sea that the creator of their pantheon had to defeat before he made creation. And so really, she's just this entity that is hostile to the creator. That is the role that Leviathan plays in the Bible. And so if you want to say real, I would say in a spiritual sense, yes, the figure behind Leviathan, the sea dragon, all the things, we in the New Testament, we call him Satan. He's the arch nemesis of God that he created and then he rebelled. That's who that is. So is there a physical zoological animal that represents Leviathan? My take is no. Because also you go through here and Leviathan becomes synonymous with this great sea beast, this great sea dragon, carried forward into Revelation of this fire-breathing dragon with a harlot that rides it. So unless we dig up, I guess an ancient harlot riding a fire-breathing dragon, I'm not too convinced that Revelation is depicting a dinosaur or something. But yeah, to answer your question, I think this is more of a mythological entity that is representing the arch enemy of God, or the arch, I would say nemesis, but he's not really, like you said, he poses no threat, ultimately.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it should help, and in a good way, challenge readers who read the Bible in the most literal sense. The same way with Rakia or the dome or the flat earth or anything that, the authors never meant this to be scientific. It is true spiritually and theologically, but not scientifically. So many times people argue over something that the original audience never meant to be seen in that way. Right. So I think your way of interpreting and helping is nothing new. It's just continuing on all these scholars coming and saying the same thing for decades. And this is, yes, an in-house debate, but I just want to, because I have friends who are very fundamentalist or super conservative. I'm conservative, but I'm not trying to be dogmatic. I'm trying to learn more and be open-minded. So I hope this will help them and challenge them to learn more and to see, hey, maybe there's something behind this, and
Yeah, well,
behind what Caleb is saying.
yeah, and if I could say just a couple things about that. First of all, um, like I said, that I had shifted some views from when I first came into the faith, and I came in at a very um, Calvinistic side, and I've shifted from that. So I understand both sides of the argument. I just mentioned, again, I don't want to say the name, but that I live very close to a big boat, and I used to be very much on board with that big boat. And as I studied more, I'm not. So I understand both sides. I sympathize with both sides more than some do, because these are very hostile arguments a lot of times. And I think we need to start every single one of these discussions with, these are secondary issues. We can serve Christ despite disagreements on that. And so we need to explore them and handle them wisely. But I think there are good answers out there for it. And just practically, in this case, I just wanted to bring up again, because you mentioned Job. If Leviathan is an actual crocodile or dinosaur or something like that, and God's going on about, look at this sea beast that I can capture and put it on the leash and stuff like that. Isn't this cool? Well, that is that ending to Job does have a punch. But if this is the chaotic, rival to God, who is responsible for the chaos in the world and the evil in the world, and God saying, Job, trust me, I've got the chaos monster on a leash. That's a much different ending. It's a lot more practical, and it shows a lot more that God's heart is not so much just about bragging in Job, but also about saying, like, I am sovereign over chaos, and I'll put an end to this when it's time.
Yeah, so as I'm getting images and thoughts while you're talking, basically at the very creation, God did not annihilate chaos. He just put it into his sovereignty and gave it less space to maneuver and to dwell, but it's still a vast space. So by not killing, let's say, Leviathan or the chaos monster immediately, God put it on a leash, but that spirit animal, if I can put it that way, or the enemy, which is a spiritual enemy, is still there and is still an enemy of God's people or people in general. So God is like basically telling people throughout the whole scriptures, the day is coming when I'm going to deal with Leviathan, I'm going to deal with chaos, I'm going to deal with these troublesome waters. And I don't know if you heard about this, you probably have. There's scholars who are saying when, for example, Jonah was drowned, and when he was crying from the belly of the beast, that he was surrounded by waters, and that some scholars believe that he actually died, and God heard his plea from Sheol, which is not hell, but from the underworld, and God resurrected him, and that showed to be the imagery for Jesus when he said that the same thing will happen to the Son of Man, meaning to him. So the same way Jonah would resurrect, Jesus also resurrect. And when I heard this several years ago, I was like, wow. It's like, first I was doubting. I was like, is that what the passage means? And then I was reading more. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure 100%, but it does make sense. So basically, God throughout the whole scripture is coming to rescue people from this. It's not necessarily about water, right? But that's that imagery that is connected with the ancient Near East. God is coming to subdue the spirit that is living there or maybe dwelling there, but it's not just on that location. And that finally comes to happen in Revelation. So this is another topic, but I also want to say I have some books on the topic of Yahweh as a warrior. God is not just, see, many times, and I know I believe you would agree with this. We see Old Testament God as wrathful, and Jesus is so kind, so loving, almost like a hippie. But God is, it's neither. God is something different throughout the whole Bible. He has so many attributes. He has so many characters that he shows to both to his enemies and to his people. But one of these things is that God is the warrior. God will not allow this beast, this Leviathan, to torture his people forever. And it's such a beautiful imagery and promise that, hey, I have not forgotten you. The same way I rescued my people from in Exodus from slavery, I'm coming to rescue you from what? From sin, from death, from sickness, from everything that is torturing in like look at your flesh, it's decaying. But there'll be a day where you will not be decaying, because as Adam and Eve distanced themselves from the tree of life, my son Jesus, who is the true life, you will never be distanced from him, and because of him and through him, you'll have eternal life. Like, how can you not love biblical theology? It gives you so much depth, it gives you so much explanation, it gives you this love and passion for teaching and preaching or writing or making podcasts like this one. It's like we can marvel about God's wisdom, or like in this sense of his attribute as the warrior, because he's the one that we have to depend on to rescue us. And he's coming. He won't be late, and he won't fail his promise. And I know I went a little bit off topic, but I just felt so passionate about this. I don't know if you want to comment on this before I switch to something slightly.
No, I'm with you, because that's a great point to make, because even it makes me think of Habakkuk as well, where he's asking the same question of essentially, hey, Assyria is here. God, what are you going to do about this? This isn't right. Don't worry, I'm going to send somebody else to take them out. Oh, but they're also going to be terrible. So Habakkuk's like, this isn't fair for you to send Babylon to wipe out Assyria. Babylon's just as bad. And so the answer in the 3rd chapter of Habakkuk is eventually he's going to slay Leviathan. And so that's the same answer he gives to Job. Eventually, I'm going to crush the serpent and it'll be over. And the second thing is, all throughout a lot of the passages where creation comes up, during the places where the psalmist or others are calling out for God's help, the thing that they lean on is God, creator, the water restrainer. That's the aspect of God that they lean on. He is the one that can restrain the chaos. So that's just a theme that you found all throughout Scripture, really cool. And it's really practical, just as we think about who God is for us and the hope that we look forward to in the future. He's going to restrain the waters, ultimately wipe them out. And then that sea dragon that he created in the 1st chapter, which, keep that in mind, the sea dragon, Leviathan, is a creature in the Bible, whereas in the other mythologies, Leviathan is pre-existent. He created Leviathan to be a good creature, and then it rebelled, which that sounds familiar, humans. So it's a common theme there. But yeah, that's the theme we get, is like God is going to slay Leviathan, and he is the water restrainer, so he has the power to end chaos.
Thank you for that. By the way, you got about 10 minutes ago compliment from Philip M. He said, I loved your book. I don't know if you know the guy. I'm going to share his comment again.
I don't. Thank you, Philip. I hope
so. That must be encouraging.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, thank you. I like hearing the people benefit from the book, really, or just the truths that are in it. That's what I want to do, is through this, showing the Exodus, going through Genesis, because maybe we'll get to this at some point, but at the very end of Genesis, all these motifs, they climax and come to a head on Joseph, and you get this crystal clear picture of who Jesus is supposed to be. And so I think that's really the punch that you find at the end of this book. But again, there's so much at the front end, because the first 11 chapters of Genesis, they're just so weird. And if you understand them, they're also so meaningful.
They're weird, but they're probably the hardest to understand. And but they're in a way too fantastic, not fake, but from someone like me who loves this weird stuff, fringe stuff, fantasy, sci-fi. For me, when you read them, it's like, wow, it's like the Bible has so much to offer, and you may think it's hilarious, you may think it's a fairy tale, but there's depth on every page. I'm not saying the rest of the Bible is boring or nothing like that, but those first 11 chapters they're special in that way. That's why when you check sometimes commentaries on Genesis, the first 11 chapters, they can be lengthy or lengthier than the rest of 39 chapters. It's interesting, because it's like those 11 chapters, if the authors and Bible commentators, if they spend a lot of time dissecting, going to the ancient sources, there's a lot to say. I mean, just on Genesis, just on the beginning of Genesis, there's a lot to say in the first couple of chapters. Not even to go there by the end.
Well, and like you're saying, these are really the most interesting parts if you understand the world behind it, because if you understand it, this is their, myth, mystery, and majesty. This is their sci-fi. This is their fantasy. That's, that kind of genre, the stuff that catches our attention, at least, geeky people, the good stuff. That's what this is for them.
Caleb, you mentioned, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes ago about Marduk killing Tiamat, which was in Mesopotamian creation myth and Umelish. This was the theme, right? But we also see, and you mentioned this on page, what is the page 6? You mentioned here another ancient Near East mythology where a similar account is mentioned, and this is in Ugaritic Baal cycle, how Baal is conquering Yam, or you mentioned Yam and Ahar, meaning sea and river, respectively. Yam is not only named after the sea and rivers, but he's the power behind them. Before Baal can establish his rule over the cosmos, he must defeat Yam. When Baal battles Yam, he achieves victory when he strikes the skull of Prince Yam with his mace. When the serpent's head is crushed, Baal is able to build his house and establish his rule. I have a couple of questions that may be unfair to you because if you didn't prepare, or maybe you don't know the answers. But many times, like, I get up, I come up with questions as I'm talking. I don't know why, but that happens. My mind is always like that. First question is like, what was? I mean, there's so many similarities between the old Hebrews and their neighbors who they shared similar cosmology. One of them is like serpent was the main enemy. Like, I was just wondering, do you know why? The second thing would be like, isn't it funny and even ironic that Baal here is the fitting serpent, but Baal is the one who Jesus identifies as Satan in the gospel. So basically, Satan is the serpent, is supposedly defeating the bad serpent. No, it doesn't work that way. That mythological aspect coming from Mesopotamia is hilarious if you see that Jesus identifies Baal with Satan. So see, serpent cannot defend itself because serpent is the serpent. That's the arch enemy. Baal was portrayed as a good guy, which is not true. So it's like, it's hilarious. But before you try to answer that, I was just wondering if you ever found in your studies why both in the Bible and extra biblical sources, when it comes to these mythologies, it's always about the snake. I mean, yeah, they're venomous, yeah, they're poisonous, yeah, they can be dangerous, but not just snakes. They had so many other terrible animals and monsters around them. So I was just wondering if you know why serpents, is it connected maybe with Seraph and Seraphim or not?
Yeah, no, there's snakes around the globe that are portrayed as like spiritually negative things. Why it is on a larger scale globally in certain places, I don't know what the common thread or the coincidence may be. But what's really interesting that throws kind of a wrench in this is in Egypt, the snake was a symbol for Pharaoh. And so it was a positive symbol in Egypt, where really Egypt influenced the just Israelite culture and literature quite a bit. And so that's surprising. However, up north, closer to Israel, near Canaan and Mesopotamia, it's again a negative figure, usually the rebellious deity attributed to, as a sea deity. Why exactly they are the snakes are negative, serpents are negative? I don't entirely know the answer. I don't know if it's something about them seeing folk tales about snakes in water or snakes biting you and killing you sneakily. I don't know exactly, but that's interesting to think about. Now, so the other thing, what was the second part of your question there?
I'm embarrassed to say I forgot. I lost it like 5 minutes ago that I said, and I was listening to you and I forgot it. Yeah, maybe if I remember, I'll ask you again.
How can Baal be considered the serpent if he was the one crushing the serpent? Okay, so it's really cool that actually Marduk crushes Tiamat's head as well, just like Baal crushes Yam's head. Yam and Nahar are the same deity, just different names for this water deity. So that idea in Genesis 3 of the seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head is not a new cultural idea. It's just saying that God's person is going to have victory over Leviathan, the snake. And so that's just a very cultural way of, victory within a mythological setting. Now, as far as Baal, that's part of what's going on here. This is imagery, symbolism in a lot of ways. So you kind of bleed over from getting the symbolism in the mythology representing things in a fantasy world sort of deal to what does this mean in real life. So as you go through Genesis, and even as you go up to, let's take John the Baptist, for instance. Whenever he sees the Pharisees, he says, "Hey, you brood of vipers." He's calling them children of snakes, and so they are now the seed of the serpent because they are opposing God's people. And so what you get with that is it's not strictly about actual zoology, genealogy, DNA, whatever. It's not like actual snakes. It's about what side are you on. And so in Baal's myth, in the Baal cycle, he is portrayed as the good guy. However, people are being tempted in the Bible to worship him, even though he is a rebellious god or a false god. And so in the biblical mind, he's not the hero, he's the snake. So snake is kind of a way just to say, you're the bad guy.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. On page 9, you cross-reference from Jonah and from this whole imagery of the deep waters and the serpents or chaos monster being a threat to humankind, and you quote David, and who said in Psalm 18 verses 16 and 17 the following. He said, "He, God, sent me from on high. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He rescued me from my strong enemy and from those who hated me, for they were too mighty for me." And now you said, David, in a place of danger and death, is figuratively in the sea. In this particular psalm, he's being rescued from his enemies, as he describes the enemies of Yahweh's chosen kings as waters. I'm sorry, Yahweh's chosen king, singular, not plural. I said kings. So chosen king as waters. Since the sea is the home of death, and the sea monster, this passage can speak of death and enemies through only the image of the sea. I was wondering through your studies and preparation, not just for this book, but if you ever had a chance to preach or teach in any setting, when we look at Sheol, that supposedly had chambers, and it was seen as prison, and it had Rephaim spirits going there that will look scary, and like everyone would go there, righteous and unrighteous. They'll have different chambers, they'll have different sections. Some scholars see that Tartarus is actually a subsection of that. However, that looks like, no one knows exactly. And I'm thinking those waters, the waters that will be the waters of death, that David would be afraid of them, or that Jonah, who would literally, he was diving deep in the waters, but then figuratively, the waters of light, the tentacles of the monster will entangle him. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure which character could be also David that uses that kind of lingo. I'm just interested that could we somehow connect the waters of that with Hades, with the underworld, where like, you know what, there's no escape. You like your end is coming, but before you die, you're in this prison. Tentacles are around you. There's no help. The sea dragon is here. You're kind of going to be afraid and maybe even tortured until the future, but we don't know when is the future coming. Am I going too much in trying to reconcile these two? Because I remember when I went to Moody Bible Institute, I did once a paper on the on death being seen in the Old Testament, and I remember writing about Sheol as well, right? So I'm just trying to see if Sheol and these deep waters, chaotic waters, and being entangled with these tentacles, almost like Cthulhu's, right? Or let's say, what was the similar? Well, not the similar, but the Kraken, like the Nordic mythological enemy. So I'm just trying to imagine something like that. Maybe not literally, but that's how that will be. This, logic of people who be like, listen, if God doesn't come and do a miracle and save me, that's it. I'm dying, or I already died. I'm in the underworld, but without God and resurrection, there's no hope for me unless He comes and slays the enemy. So we're just trying to see how you see the Hades or the underworld, Sheol. We can use any word we can with these deep chaotic waters.
Yeah. So that picture that you showed earlier of the worldview of the ancient Near Eastern person, if you go into the waters and you go down deep enough, essentially you're now in the land of Sheol. You're in the realm of the dead. That's how they thought about this. So there's not like a 1-for-1, like water equals death, but it's basically like if you're the ocean is the realm of the dead. That's where you go. You even see that in Revelation when it talks about the waters will give up those who are in them. So it's, referring to those who are in the realm of the dead. As for like Hades and the realm of the dead and Sheol, like what's the representation or the relationship there? Really, if you go back to the Septuagint, which for those of you who don't know what the Septuagint are, it's the translation of the Old Testament 200 to 300 years before Jesus, essentially. It was a process took, over the course of 100 years, but they started translating Sheol and death as basically just Hades. So there's kind of just a 1-for-1. The mythological world, the worldview of the ancient Near East got transported into the Hellenistic Greek ideas, and they just started calling Sheol Hades in the New Testament. So there's not really a difference between those, even though Jewish people in the first century may have thought differently about what they call Hades than what Greeks may have thought about when they called Hades, because they pictured Sheol, Jewish people pictured Sheol, death, Hades, as just this kind of collecting, holding place for all the dead. Whereas now, post-Jesus, at least, it's at least clear that Paul says once you die, you are going to be with the Lord. And so there is this aspect where we're going to be with him, where he is enthroned in heaven. What exactly that picture is, honestly, the New Testament doesn't spell it out super clear, and there's a lot of debate around the pictures it does give us, because it's always in parables or apocalyptic imagery, which is a whole different topic. And so you could map it out and be very straightforward, but it's also very complex. So the one just base rule to do, especially when you're looking in the Old Testament, is when you're reading about how waters and death relate to each other, is take a step back and don't try to plot it out on a map exactly what everything, waters means exactly this at this time. It doesn't mean enemies, it means death only. But here it does mean enemies. So what's going on? You have to take these as symbols, which that's what they are. So they can be used in different ways in different contexts. And that's the thing. You have to look at the context of the particular passage you're reading and see what is the metaphorical baggage that the author is uploading onto the symbol at this location. And so that's kind of a good guiding principle, I would say. And that's why it's loose enough that it can be associated directly with death, but it can also be related to other negative things that would push you into death, like enemies, or you can call death the pit as well, that David does in another psalm. So there's just a network and a web of different different metaphors that you can use, especially when you're speaking of poetry, to make the same point.
Thank you for that. I was wondering if we can just briefly go back to Tohu and Tohu Vabohu. There's something very interesting that you mentioned by the end of page 10 and page 11. You go back to John Walton, whom we mentioned a while ago, and then you mentioned some passages besides Genesis. You mentioned Isaiah 34:11 and Jeremiah 4:23, and how these are to be understood by the scholars in the context as ruin or chaos. And you mentioned here another scholar, John Gollingay, and he says he also takes this approach and concludes that the term chaos appropriately gives the meaning tohu vabohu. And then underneath that, in the next paragraph, he says both of the terms ruin or chaos are accurate if by them we mean someplace or someone in a state of disorder that is threatening to Yahweh's imagers. So I'm thinking, okay, this would be interesting if we can, elaborate a little bit on this, because chaos was not related only to waters. Surprisingly, to some people, it can be and it was places of a desert that were like desolate, like what thrives here? Scorpions, snakes, again, and not coincidentally, all the animals that would be hyenas, screeching animals, birds that will be associated with everything bad or demonical in the rest of the whole Bible, both the Old and the New Testament. So yeah, this type of couple of animals can survive there, but this is not a place for God to put humankind, the desert. Then we can go in the spiritual sense what the desert means. But I was just thinking, if you want to add something on that the desert also representing chaos and how Yahweh's ways, like bring the waters, bring the greenery in the desert for humans.
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to that pre-creation state, we have the waters, darkness, and the land. And the land is said to be, in a lot of your translations, the ESV says formless and void. That's not my favorite translation of the phrase, but it's one that a lot of us recognize. It also gives us the picture of like empty, vast space, which is not what they were thinking of, because they didn't really know much about, outer space. Surprise. So what that phrase formless and void is actually the Hebrew phrase tohu vavohu, 2 words. And so those phrases are used. They're kind of hard to determine. It's kind of a hard phrase to determine just from Genesis 1. That's where a lot of the debate comes in, because the joint phrase tohu vavohu only appears 3 times in the Bible. And most of the places that you find it in, somewhere like, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the text is so broken that it's hard to really get much out of it. I think there's just a couple other useful places that we can look. I think 3, and they do shed some light. But really, even within the biblical canon, we can see what this means if we go to those passages you mentioned from Isaiah and Jeremiah, because in both of those places, it's Isaiah 34:11, Jeremiah 4:23, where the prophet is talking about God coming to wipe out Israel with another army. And he's going to thrust the land back into a state of tohu vavohu. And so into this state of ruin, of inhabitability for the people, and of, death and destruction. And so we go back to Genesis 1, and what does tohu vavohu mean? What is the state of that pre-creation land? Well, chaos is a pretty good term. Some people have uploaded a meaning to chaos to mean like it's some sort of hostile entity, something like that, which that's not quite right. It's more so, like I mentioned, that it's desolate. It's a wasteland. It's in a state of ruin. I like Robert Alter's translation, saying that it's welter and waste, to kind of keep the rhyme of tohu vavohu. And actually, that first term tohu refers to a desert, to that just dry, desolate wasteland. And that's what's there before creation. There's land there, but it's a wasteland. You can't do anything with it. It's not a place that's fit for God to dwell and to put his imagers. And so that's really what's behind that state, both in Genesis and later, whenever, because of their sin, he's going to thrust them back into a wasteland.
So I don't know about you, but like I said, I don't know if this is related with people who are more introverted, but I tend to space out all the time and think about things at work, at church, sometimes with friends, and even during podcasts. So many times when I'm listening to my guests speaking, based on what they're speaking, almost like I can like teleport almost there. Imagine how that looks like. So while you were talking about the desolation and destruction, I was thinking about the Hobbit's movie of Desolation of Smaug. I'm like, but it's a work of fiction, even though Tolkien was a devout Catholic, right? So he implemented many religious and Christian messages in the books, and inevitably they're parts of movies. So I'm thinking if something like desolation is like not necessarily coming, of course, like in the books and movies in the same fashion, but it is a good representative of something that is destroyed. And unless God brings renewal, unless God brings, makes the soil fertile, unless God brings waters, unless God brings, grass and crops, something that will be, that will enable human life to flourish, then that's permanently desolated place. It doesn't matter if it came through a meteorite strike, through a nuclear war, through a plague and whatever, or it came like through the desolation of Smaug, because the enemy was sent there. But that's the picture I'm getting. Like this total destruction and annihilation comes unless Yahweh prevents, or even if it happens, the hope is only if Yahweh comes and restores what God always intended. And again, it gives me another imagery, and I'm sorry, I'll finish in 10 seconds, because I was listening, because I'm interested in so many things. So I was just recently reading an article how I think in Saudi Arabia they're planning to plant I don't know how many billions of trees in the desert, trying to fight the desert because the sand is getting bigger. so it can help them to grow their own crops and stuff over time. And because they're very wealthy, they can afford to do this. And I'm like, wow, well, in a way, this is a human way to start to fight against the desert, to fight against the destruction, the something that is opposite from life. That, yes, but it's also these circumstances where life cannot even begin, let even thrive. Again, we're talking about snakes and scorpions and everything that represents enemy of humans. So I was just thinking how this is the destruction that we can see both in the spiritual and in the physical realm, that is like all encompassing. And God forbid you end up there, unless Yahweh comes and rescue you, you'll end up in this desolation, and there's no end. There's no way out.
Right. Well, I mean, something that I hadn't thought about that you just said about, say, like it was a nuclear war or something that made a land desolate. Like, if you want a good modern picture of tohu vabohu, think of Chernobyl. Like, you can't dwell there at all. That is a place that it is not fit for humans to enter, or any sort of civilization to be built up. And so you got to think, go back to an ancient Near Eastern example. If if creation, the climax of creation in every ancient Near Eastern story is civilization or God's people, and God dwelling with them, either in a garden or in a temple. Well, civilization is kind of the apex of creation. And so if you go outside of civilization in the ancient Near East, you're going to run into a couple of things that you cannot handle. The first thing is, waters, the ocean. The other thing is the desert. You can't survive in either of those environments. And so they are hostile to humans. They are not good for civilization to be built. And if civilization cannot be built there, God cannot dwell there with his people. And so that is the picture of tohu vavohu that appears in their mind.
I also want to add something, because you mentioned Chernobyl, and again, I read about this news a while ago, but I just want to say how God is amazing. Even though Chernobyl was heavily destroyed, and that radiation wave would go hundreds, if not thousands of I'm European and they're part of Europe, right? So I'll use kilometers away. But it's so amazing that they found this black fungus, and I will not even try to pronounce this Latin. It's two words and they're very long. But they found this fungi to be able to sort of eat radiation. And what is interesting is that it's thriving in the very reactor of Chernobyl, and it uses melanin to convert radiation into energy. So I'm just thinking, imagine this hope for people who live there, because something that was a synonym for destruction one day can be like, oh, there's a new hope. There's new Eden for them, so to speak. I got goosebumps because this is for them. It's like, hey, give me, we're tired of this desolation. We're tired of this radiation. Give us something. And this thing is slowly, so to speak, suppressing or eating radiation. I'm like, man, that's so amazing. Praise God for this, because thank God for science, right? And medicine and everything. But God can still do, and he still does miracles, and he can alter things in the course of nature that he wants. And he can use something that scientists wouldn't know that can happen. Just like the problem with plastic waste is in the whole world. So they're trying different sciences from different countries. Another article I read a while ago, they're trying to combat it. They found also some microbe that is able to eat plastic. I'm like, wow, that's such an encouraging news for the whole, because that's a global problem. It's in the ocean. Animals are dying. It goes to the seashore of so many countries. It produces enormous amount of waste. We're talking about hundreds of tons or millions of tons, of waste. But this microbe, this whatever it is able to eat plastic. So I'm just going there by intentionally giving parallels how in our modern times we can parallel something, because I cannot parallel something with Azazel. I cannot parallel something with two goats. I cannot compare something as living in the desert as if I would know how that looks like. I cannot. I cannot compare myself with something like that. But that's why I'm giving this modern example, so people will say, well, look, you're dealing with this plastic waste, and there's no help. Well, this microbe, this whatever it is able. Or if you go to the Chernobyl, this black fungus is able to slowly kill radiation. It will take time, but still there's hope. So imagine you go to the natives who are dealing with something like radiation or nuclear waste or something, and like their children, their grandchildren are born with certain defects, physical defects, because that this has been happening in that area for decades, even in surrounding areas, because the nuclear wave and that it's not like, oh, it will just hit that region. It spreads, right? So imagine you go somewhere and tell them, I have I have the gospel for you. I have the good news. The good news is that we found, thank God, the solution for this. That's the hope that God brings to his people after the destruction. He's bringing them back to Eden. And that's why I'm excited, because it's all connected and it makes sense. And we can see these parallels, like I say, in the movie with the hobbits or with science today. So I'm excited. When we're switching to the next subchapter of creation, you come to something so cool and interesting that you titled Functional Ontology and Temple. You can spend any amount of time you would like to dissect this subchapter for the audience.
Yeah, so I didn't come up with this one by any stretch of the imagination. This one was actually from John Walton. He has done, I think, the primary work for this, and that is go to Genesis 1 is Ancient Cosmology if you want a really nerdy book about this. If you want something a little more lightweight, I would go to his Lost World series, the Genesis 1 or the Creation, first book in the series anyway. And yeah, he's done a really good job of going through a lot of ancient Near Eastern mythology and just their texts and the expectations they have between Egypt, Sumerian, Mesopotamian, different Akkadian texts, the Ugaritic material. So, and all through those, I've said this several times already, but the pinnacle of creation in the ancient Near East was not the creation of matter. It was the creation of a society where the deity and the people were able to dwell together. And so it was never about, again, the material. It was about taking the material that was already there and shaping it into something useful and then designating it for a new purpose. That is what creation is. And that's really how we create as humans as well. You know, if you create a jar, you don't create a jar ex nihilo. You take some clay, you pinch some off, you shape it into what you need, and then you designate it and say, this is now a jar. This is no longer clay, just clay. It's a jar. There was not a material change, but there was a change of function. And so its being is wrapped up in the function that has been given it. Just like in Genesis, in the creation accounts, we see humanity. Humanity's not created ex nihilo. We see they are taken from the dust, and the breath of life is put into them. In Genesis 2, there's actually a spring and some water in the mix there as well. And so we are taken, we are shaped and designated now to be no longer just dust, water, and breath, but we are now humans, his imagers. And so that is how creation works in the ancient Near East. And so on the flip side, if you think about what nothing is to an ancient Near Eastern person, they don't think about the empty vacuum of space. Nothing for them is a place where there is nothing that is functionally contributing to the order of society. And so they would look out at a desert or out at the endless waters and say, there's nothing there. It'd be kind of like, this is an example I use in the book. If you were going to look for a house somewhere and you get there and all there is, you take this house and it's got clay bricks that are, built up into it. Well, if you go to look for that house and instead of finding the house, you just find a big pile of unformed clay, you're just going to say, there's nothing here. I can't find anything, because you're thinking functionally. There's no house here like you said there would be. All there here is the pre-creation material, and so this is effectively nothing. That's how they thought about what creation is, what it means to be something. And so that's really why you don't get this concern for matter. You get a concern for, is there a functioning ordered society that can house humans and where the God and the humans can have a relationship of some sort that upholds order. So, and that's also why at the pinnacle of creation is a temple in the midst of the society that is built. And that happens every time. The pinnacle of society, or the pinnacle of creation, is not just society, but it is society as a means by which humans and deities can be together. that expresses itself in Genesis with humans being placed in God's dwelling in the garden, which is a cosmic temple. Again, John Walton has shown how there is a lot, also G.K. Beale in The Temple and the Church's Mission. They have both shown a lot of overlap between the construction of the tabernacle and the construction of the world in the first chapters of Genesis, and also the temple in the Book of Kings as well. There's a lot of overlap, especially John Walton too has shown that there's overlap in like the 7-day preparation between creation and the tabernacle, the 10 commands of God that happen in the first chapter of Genesis, and the 10 commands that God gives to Moses. There's like this report of what happens, and then a kind of designation at the end. So a lot of literary and thematic parallels between, again, temple and cosmos, and especially in the ancient Near East, the cosmos, the entire world, was understood as the first mega temple. That was where the God dwells, is the whole creation. And so, Eden is God's dwelling, the Garden of Eden, and so that's the first cosmic temple. And later on, that's really why, God tells Moses, he says, hey, make a pattern of the things that you have seen when you came up into heaven and go back down, because he's making a copy of really the entire cosmos. With the purple sparkly ceiling to kind of represent the sky, and the cherubim to go into the garden. So again, both the cultural and literary aspects in the Bible point to the entire first creation being God's temple.
Thank you for that. I came up with another question. When we enter Orthodox and Catholic churches and we see their ceilings are usually gorgeous, walls as well, but especially ceilings, because they portray the divine council and the whole, not just the Godhead, but also the whole cosmos in a way of, let's use the word heaven. Not the physical heaven, but the spiritual heaven. So when God and the ancients saw the whole cosmos as being, in a way, there to sing hymns of praises to God, worship God, serve God, and Eden serve that as a microcosmos. Can we compare this and say, well, even as evangelicals and Protestants, we can and should appreciate some of the images in Orthodox and Catholic churches, if that's on their hearts to use, not just to use imagery to worship God and use their skills and passions to glorify him, but also they're trying, and the ancient people have been always trying to depict our reality, but not even reality that we can see and touch. They couldn't touch sky, the ancients, they couldn't touch the cosmos, but like God dwells there. He lives there with his angelic army, with his sons of God, right? In the Old Testament, use that wording that Heiser used, and not just Heiser. I'm thinking, how sometimes we, as Protestants, many times attack Catholics and Orthodox as this and that, and idolizers, and so many things. And that's not where I'm going with this. But I'm just saying, how about for a change, sometimes appreciating something coming from another camp, because we don't have to always hate and attack and argue with each other. How about appreciating? Because we don't see this in Protestant churches and evangelical churches, yet we see this in faith-based traditional churches. Traditional-based churches that do try to depict cosmos and God as the ruler. For me, that's something that is beautiful. And as I walk in the church and I'm about to participate in the communion or Eucharist for them, I'm about to sing praises, I'm about to listen to the sermon or preaching, I'm looking at around me, even though I'm not in the cosmos, but those images help me to think like, well, as I'm seated here, the Bible says we already, even though we're present here, I don't know how, but we're already spiritually seated in the heavenly places. So like when we see those images, it's almost like, while I'm worshiping here, I'm somehow spiritually already transcending this place and time, and I'm already in heaven with God and his army, joining them by singing praises to God. So for me, I was just wondering if you would think the same, and if yes, how beautiful this is and how much we're lacking in Protestant churches.
Yeah, no. So First of all, I'll say, like, I can definitely give some notes of appreciation with that, even though I'm Baptist, and so we're kind of on the farthest end of the spectrum away from that. But I can still appreciate it because I mean, think about again going back to the symbolism between, or the parallels between the tabernacle and the creation. So you go into the tabernacle and you enter it from the east, just like the entrance to the garden is on the east. You go and there's two cherubim woven into the first curtains, just like there's cherubim guarding the entrance to the tabernacle, or the Garden of Eden as well. And so you go on past that, and then you have all of these almond blossoms and trees woven into the fabric of the tabernacle to represent the garden. And so there's these parallels kind of showing that as you're entering into the tabernacle, as you're entering into the temple, you're entering into God's space. And so, I've seen before where I haven't been in a whole lot of Orthodox churches, but I've seen before where there's been all this tree imagery painted on their walls to kind of get you back to that like Garden of Eden setting where we're coming back into God's space. So I do appreciate what they're doing, as long as, everyone understands that, yeah, this is not anything that's, something to be worshipped. This is rather just a visual representation of us being back in his presence, in his space, in his temple. The one thing that I wish would be different is that rather than clouds and cherubim and angels, like, kind of our Western depiction of those, that garden imagery is, I think, really cool on a biblical theological level. Even though I still appreciate what they're trying to do when I see, clouds and naked baby cherubim on the walls, even if it's not quite biblically accurate.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find some Eastern Orthodox, because I'm coming from Eastern Orthodox nation.
Okay.
This is a temple in the capital of Serbia, where I'm coming from. This is one of the biggest Eastern Orthodox temples in that part of the world, on the Balkans. I think it's number one, but it doesn't matter. I was just enjoying. I've never been inside, but I was just imagining. Let's say you enter like a temple or a church, or in a presence like this. Of course, this is just frescoes; they're not alive. But in a way, if these represent the cloud of witnesses, I'm like thinking, how amazing is it that, in a way, spiritually, you're there with Moses, with Adam, with David.
Right.
Not literally, maybe, not physically for sure, but spiritually, and we are all worshiping God. You know, as in heaven, we're trying to mimic that on earth, in this temple, in this cosmic temple that is actually the whole planet. And I was just thinking, I don't even know why I started talking about this, but I was just thinking how we can appreciate stuff like this, even though we don't have to be of the same church and even share the same, um, the same faith tradition and stuff like that. I think that we can still appreciate these things without converting, without going to churches like that. I still believe that there's something to enjoy, and like, wow, like God gave us this creativity and these skills and these gifts. So how about using them, to make something that will like bring, in a way, heaven to earth. So I don't know. I was just encouraged or impressed, based on our conversation in the last 5-10 minutes, to share this so people can enjoy.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think especially as a Baptist, like, there needs to be more conversation about this kind of stuff, because it's very often we're very quick, especially from those, I guess, more so in my tradition. I don't know about others all that much, so I won't speak for them. But we can be very quick to say, no, that's a second commandment violation, and that's horrible, and how about we focus on what's appreciable, as long as we're within biblical bounds. Let's appreciate what's appreciable and say, hey, we're brothers, not, hey, let's divide over this small stuff. That's what we do very often. We're prone to do that. And that's one of the biggest things that Paul harps on is you guys are dividing over things that are not worth dividing on.
I mean, cherub were on the either walls or curtains in the temple in the Old Testament. So would that mean that the Jews also broke the commandment by not portraying anything that is in heavens? Don't make an image. They did with cherubim, and I didn't see that God punished them or scorned them, as idolatry. So that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a difference between reminders and images of worship.
Yeah, that's a good point. I cannot help myself but to quote you here. Let me just see. Okay, I'll go to page 14. I won't stay for too long, but I have to say this because we're talking about the temple, um, Exodus waters, and stuff like that. So on page 14, you said that Jesus has undergone and led a new exodus through the waters of death by the power of the breath of God, the Holy Spirit, right? And called a new people to the priestly calling of Exodus 19:5-6. Having been separated from the nations, undergone exodus in Jesus, and given a new purpose, an assembly of Christ, the assembly of Christ is not just like a new creation, but is ontologically a new creation. Several sentences down, the motif of recreation through water and breath is why Jesus tells Nicodemus that he must be born of water and breath or spirit. Again, it's the same word, but it can mean different things based on the context, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven in John chapter 3. The fact strengthens the argument that when someone is brought through the waters or through metaphorical waters, we ought to see them undergoing an act of recreation from Yahweh. They're separated out from the ruin around them and form into a people for Yahweh's restorative purposes. And I love this how you connected the Old Testament with the New Testament, something more closer to us. And you went from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. I'm like, wow, this should be important again for people who like connecting the dots and who like taking notes. So if we see similar imagery, if we use the same words or the same kind of context in the Old Testament, if we see waters, if we see light, if we see the temple, if we see um, God's way of saving, restoring. Well, then New Testament is continuing on those parallels, on those motifs, on those concepts, right? So Jesus comes and uses the same word for ruach, for spirit, and for the waters, and he tells us, yeah, you have to be, basically, I'm paraphrasing, we have to be baptized spiritually, meaning being sealed by the Holy Spirit, receive the Holy Spirit. I don't even though I go to Assemblies of God, I don't interpret that as speaking of tongues. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. And we see this also as being baptized by the water. So we see both types of baptism applicable, and not just applicable, Jesus demanding for us to do. And I was just wondering if you want to comment on that, because you made that wonderful bridge between the two testaments, and like, hey guys, basically you're saying you see the Spirit and the waters in the Old Testament. You see them so important, not just for the Old Testament saints, but you see them for the New Testament saints as well.
No, yeah, and that's, I mean, one of the big punches of understanding this motif is, again, understanding the picture that Jesus sees himself as part of. So we've already talked about how we've seen the dividing of waters and spirit through the creation in Exodus. Well, you get to Jesus' baptism, and you have the Spirit coming down on him while he is coming out of the waters through his own baptism. So he's replaying that Exodus cycle once again. And then, just like Adam is tempted, or Adam and Eve are tempted by the serpent, then Jesus goes out and is tempted, also tested, just like the people were in the wilderness. So again, just more parallels upon parallels, except unlike Adam and Eve and unlike Israel in the wilderness being tested, he is tested and passes. He passes that test. And so as he goes through the waters, he's becoming the new king of Israel. He's becoming the head of this nation. And that's what he tells Nicodemus as well. In order to be saved, he must go through the waters and be born of waters and spirit, because there's two things going on whenever you go through water and spirit, at least, again, within this motif, within this pattern. So at first you see Adam coming through the waters, humanity coming through the waters. So to go through the waters and spirit is to become a new creation. We also see that with Israel, they are brought out, set aside, separated from the rest, and then designated as a nation of priests. So it fits that functional ontological pattern. They are a new creation. And again, it's not just me. Carmen Imes has said the same thing. She has a whole article in a book dedicated to John Walton about that fact. And so they are a new creation. Not only are they a new creation, but they are a new nation. And so whenever we're being baptized after trusting in Christ, there's two things happening there. We are becoming a new creation, following Jesus through his resurrection to go into the waters of death and come back out. So new creation, new life. We are also becoming that nation of Israel. We are we're joining a new nation and pledging our loyalty to the king of that nation, Jesus. And so there's a dual aspect there of, yes, becoming a new creation, but I think often we miss the aspect of that new national identity of being the Israel that is holding into the true vine, that idea. Because we really miss the aspect that as a community, we are loyal to King Jesus. And yeah, it's just another aspect or another place that we see that. Like Paul says that more explicitly elsewhere, but to see it in this motif, again, there's the biblical truths. You find them all over the place, presented in so many different ways, and it's so cool.
Thanks for that. Few more questions and we'll be done. The next subchapter has to deal with the Exodus motive creation, and I think in a way you touched on that. I just want to read some of the portions that you can comment on. I found them, inspiring and helpful. You said on page 17, in the Exodus out of Egypt, once the people have come through the waters as a new creation, and both sea and sea monster have been defeated, we see more similarities emerge. We see the repeated motif of life-giving waters and being put in Yahweh's dwelling. Then you continue by the end of the same page. After the Exodus, Yahweh brings his people to his mountain dwelling on Sinai, just as he brought the man to his mountain abode at the Garden of Eden. I was about to skip here, but you quote Deuteronomy 12, verses 9 to 11. And then on the following page 18, you said this. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 11 to 16, Israel is given the Edenic blessing of fruitfulness, multiplication, and subduing, and the Abrahamic blessing of the land on the basis of their obedience to the commandments. On the same basis, Israel is again promised the ability to subdue their enemies in Canaan in Deuteronomy 11. Interesting, in this passage, the land of Canaan is described as a garden which is tended by Yahweh himself. In these passages, we see Israel given rest in the land after subduing their enemies and setting up in Yahweh's garden-like dwelling, just as the first man was given rest in the garden and commissioned to subdue the land. So again, so many parallels between Exodus and Genesis. I was just wondering if you want to comment on this or not. It's up to you.
Yeah, no, that'd be good, because I think this is really what sets you up for a proper understanding of what is the purpose of Genesis, in part, in my opinion. So, again, I mentioned Seth Postel, his book Adam as Israel. I'm pulling a lot from his work in this section. And I've actually got a whole table in the book on page 23 that kind of walk through the correspondences, at least the main highlights of the correspondences between Israel and Adam. And so, again, we've already talked about both of them go through the waters. There's spirit present. The waters are restrained in both instances. And so there's, in effect, enemies defeated as well, just like the Red Sea or the Reed Sea is restrained and Pharaoh and his army are defeated. We also see that light comes at the very beginning of creation. God says, let there be light. Also, salvation happens for Israel in Exodus 14, 24, and 27, that their salvation happens in the morning as the sun rises. And that's actually a pattern you see that shows up again throughout Genesis. So sunrise is sometimes associated with salvation. We've mentioned that they become a new creation, a new humanity. There is a creation of a temple with the Garden of Eden, and then also they go out and create the tabernacle according to God's instructions. There is a spring in Genesis 2:6 and some waters in Exodus 15 that are like waters of life. I'm not too sure exactly what the intention of the parallel is, if that one's a parallel, but it is interesting that those both show up. So after that, both are rested in Yahweh's garden dwelling. They are nuacht, the same word. And so, and again, like you mentioned, that garden dwelling in Deuteronomy 11 in Canaan is described a lot like the Garden of Eden as God's garden, which, I mean, that's just really cool. So both are then blessed to be fruitful and multiply. You get that in Genesis 1:28 and then Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 11. You see that for Israel. Both of them are commissioned to subdue the garden and to subdue Canaan. There's both of them have a priestly function. Israel in Exodus 19 are commissioned to be priest. Adam is a priest. and then they're both given a command regarding good and evil. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the law, I set before you today good and evil in Deuteronomy 30. Then they have the results of the failure to keep the command happen there. There is a covenant made between both of them with Adam and Eve's marriage and the Sinai covenant, which there's more to that needs to be explained. But
I was just about to ask you, because that's the ending of the first chapter. If you want to continue, that was my last question. If you want to continue dissecting that last part of the first chapter.
Yeah, I'll jump right back to the marriage part. But then after that, you see in both cases, you see a rebellion, and then their fruitfulness is frustrated, and they're exiled east. Adam and Eve leave the garden, and Israel goes east to Assyria and Babylon. So from that, there's a lot of thematic parallels that you can see in what I just mentioned. There's a lot of key words repeated where it's really just unquestionable that whoever has authored and edited together the Torah has done so for the purpose of relaying the tradition of Torah and of Moses and the Sinai covenant and what God intends to do with humanity, relaying that to, I think, an Israelite who is sitting there in Babylon, exiled, thinking, where is God? And we're also kind of in exile, waiting for Jesus's return. So that has a lot of implication for how we read this book as well. That's a whole nother tangent. It's actually a series we're going through on myself and Nate Young on our podcast is canon right now. So that's a whole nother rabbit trail. But yeah, I'll go back to the marriage, like you mentioned. So this one gets a little bit complex, but as you go through the prophets, you see again and again that the Sinai covenant is referred to as a marriage between Israel and Yahweh. That's how it's thought of. Now, on top of that, you go to Ephesians 5, and Paul says that the mystery of marriage is the relationship between Christ and his church. And he refers back to Genesis 2, Genesis 1, where Adam and Eve are married, or the first humans are married. And what's really interesting is that word mystery is not used just as like, it's a fun little word game that I came up with, that kind of thing. The word mystery in this context has a very technical sense to it. It means something that was actually in the original context of Genesis, but was not fully clear until now. It was a partially revealed truth. And G.K. Beale, he has another book co-authored with Benjamin Glad, Hidden But Yet Revealed, I believe is the title of it. But anyway, in that book, they show how mystery has that technical sense. And so what Paul is saying is that we should be reading Genesis as though the relationship between God and his people is typified, is modeled in the covenant, in the marriage between Adam, or the first two humans, the first male and female. So what you get out of that is the fact that, yes, not only should we be seeing the prophets reading the Sinai covenant as a marriage, but also seeing the first marriage as a model of the close relationship between God and his people, which is also why it's interesting that he says that a man shall leave his father and mother and go to be with his wife, where that was not the custom back in this culture, but rather we see God pursuing us relentlessly, pursuing his bride. And so that's how you see the relationship between God and his people in the first chapters of Genesis. And it's also another element of the Exodus motif that you see where there is a covenant / marriage between the first humans, another covenant with God and Noah, another covenant again at Sinai and some other places in between. But again, just another connection between Adam and Israel.
And I'll conclude with this. And in that passage from Genesis that you just quoted, that a man shall leave his parents to find a wife, Jesus did the same for us. He temporarily left his kingdom to find us, to gather us under his wings, and to bring us into his kingdom, and to inherit through him all the blessings that God the Father has bestowed upon Jesus for him. And Jesus is now sharing that with us. It's such a profound and deep mystery of undeserving love that God chooses some like us, some like me, who fail him, to share his vast riches of this universe. Someone who chooses to live in the heart of the temple, someone like us, it's truly speaking about something that can provoke love, gratitude, tears of joy. These are the things they do because we're deeply um, undeserving yet deeply loved. So how does this paradox works? Well, it works only because God decided to step in time, be incarnated, come and rescue us, and praise God for that. Uh, Caleb, it's been such a joy. I enjoyed from the beginning to the end. We nerd out when it comes to so many topics and subtopics, not just from your book, but also everything that came to my mind. I also want to encourage the audience. We spent about hour and 45 dissecting just the intro and the first chapter. And even with the first chapter, I skipped a lot. So please do yourself a favor, bless your Bible study group, your pastor, your priest, your friend, buy the book, um, get into more biblical theology material so you can learn and grow in God's knowledge. And by doing that, you'll be blessed and a blessing to others. Caleb, it's like I said, it's been an honor. I really enjoyed these couple of hours, a little bit less. I hope God blesses you and use you even more, inviting more books. And I'm looking forward to our sequel in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really a fun conversation. I appreciate all the questions you come up with all of a sudden and fire back, because it spurs on a lot of good conversation. It's really practical too. So I appreciate your ministry, what you're doing here, and just sharing good truth with people.
Thank you so much, brother. May God bless you and may God bless all of you. Friday, Sean and I will be coming. We're still thinking if we shall be analyzing the scroll of Melchizedek or maybe something else. And Sunday, I'm having Bob, who is the Christian fantasy author who wrote a series of novels on spiritual warfare. And the first book made it even into a movie. So him being a book author and movie producer, it's a big deal for me. So I'm looking forward to hosting Bob next Sunday. God bless you all. Please, if willing, keep subscribing, liking, and sharing this material. It doesn't cost you anything and means a lot to me. So thank you once again. May you have a wonderful week and see you Friday.